Okay, so coming to our first question. What is the evidence that horses cause damage in the alpine areas? And a lot of the evidence I'll draw on was presented at the Kosciuszko Science Conference, which was held at the Australian Academy of Science in 2018. And there's also a special edition of Ecological Management and Restoration from 2019 that has a lot of these papers in it. Now you can find links to all of these on my webpage. So if you just go to that webpage, you can find links to most of the evidence that I'll be talking about today. So feral horses cause serious degradation across the Australian Alps, and this is a study by Robertson et al. Now, this provides some important background. So here's a map of the Alps going from the ACT up here down through Kosciuszko over the Victoria-New South Wales border. I don't think you're allowed to cross that just at the moment. Down through the Eastern Alps and over to the Bogong High Plains area here. Now, if you have a look at this map, you can see these hashed areas. So this was the distribution of feral horses in about 2018. So it's a couple of years out of date now, and they've since expanded in both directions here. But you can see that there's a big chunk of horses here, some on an area in the Bogong High Plains, a little patch here, one up in the state forests just to the west of Kosciuszko, and in this area in the north of Kosciuszko. Now, Robertson et al. Had sample sites throughout this whole region. So you can see all those little dots, 186 sites. That's a really big and substantial study. And these are some of the results. Now, I'm not going to show many graphs, but I'll just walk you through this one. So on the vertical axis is the site score. So this is so sites in better condition have higher scores. Sites in worse condition have low scores. In all of these graphs, the left-hand boxes, left-hand columns, these are the sites that didn't have horses, and the right-hand columns are the sites that did have horses. So you can see here that for stream bank stability, pugging damage, the profile of the drainage line, and the sediment level on the stream bed, in all cases, sites that have horses present are in worse condition for all of those measures. And this just illustrates some of the things they were measuring. So you've got breakdown of the stream bank. You can see extensive pugging here due to horses. And horse damage is pretty easy to see. They've got big feet. Nothing else has feet like horses. You can see that this channelization forming, this silt going into the channel. Whereas beyond this fence here, you can see what the native vegetation should really be looking like. So it's been vastly transformed. Here's another shot of these exclosures at Kawombat Flat. This one's from 2003, and this one's from more recently. This is in Pulsford, took these earlier photos and came back later. And you can see that, well, it's looking pretty mushy and yucky over here. Later on, more recently, it's even in worse condition. So you can see that these edges are becoming quite sharp, and quite a bit of soil has been lost from this area. So the damage that horses cause to these streamlines is incontrovertible. Here's the broad-toothed rat, possibly the cutest small rodent in the national park. And a study by Schultz et al. Looked at the effects of horses on broad-toothed rats. Now, they surveyed 181 sites in northern Kosciuszko. They were searching for the green rat poo in runways and pop holes. So that's how you survey them. You look for their poo, because a rat can produce a lot of poo per day. So if they're present, you're pretty likely to detect them. And an important statistic coming out of this result is the number of rat poos counted. And everybody just have a little guess in your head as to how many you think would be counted in a study like this. Just while you're thinking of that, so the green color is fresh poo. And then after it's been around for some months, it becomes this white color. So it's really quite distinctive, and you can age the poo as well. The number of poos counted in this study, 13,425. That was a minor distraction. The key result for this study is shown in this graph. So here we've got the probability of occurrence. So a value of 1 means it always occurs there. A value of 0 means you never see this species at those sites. You can see there's a really strong relationship with the amount of horse damage. So as horse damage gets up to intermediate and high values, basically the number of populations populations are becoming extinct, and they're only about 50% of them present at intermediate values, and pretty well they're all extinct when horse damage is high. So this is really strong evidence that that these rats are extremely vulnerable to high levels of horse damage. And you can see why. So here's another fence comparison from Ian Pulsford's study. You can see inside the fence where horses can't reach, this thick grass. This is broadtooth rat habitat. They build their little tunnels in there. They depend on that grass to hold the snow up in winter, and they live happily underneath the snow. And you can see out here that habitat just does not exist. A broadtooth rat cannot survive in this environment. And as horses nibble their way through their habitat and convert it to this sort of lawn, the broadtooth rats are exposed, and then we presume they die in unpleasant ways, and most likely they're vulnerable to predation from things like foxes and cats. So one of the other impacts is to peat bogs and fens. These are critically endangered ecosystems. You know, they're on the federal list. Now this peat that you can see exposed due to horse trails in this bog, it accumulates at 1 meter every 3,000 years. So this is about half a meter. You know, there's over 1,000 years of peat just being washed away right there. The peat bogs up in the Alps store 3.5 million tons of carbon. And so horses are causing erosion. This carbon is being lost into the streams, and the channelization, so these channels that the horses form, that causes the whole peatland to dry out. So the water drains out from the edges, and the peat dries out at the edges, and that causes the carbon to be lost as methane and carbon dioxide. And of course, soil erosion, so all this dirt that's washing down is a threat to water resources. So this severe erosion really is a threat to the water catchments. And you've got to remember that you know, the Murray-Darling Basin supports over 3 million Australians. The Alps yield around 30% of the basin's water, and the Alps water supports about 1/4 of the basin's production. That's 5.5 billion, you know, on average. So, and of course, ultimately, this livestock, so cattle, were excluded to protect that water quality. But now we've got horses threatening this critical water source. The horses they don't only impact those high wet areas, so it's not just the bogs where they're affecting them. They're also having big impacts in the lower elevation dry areas. So this is a study by Jessica Ward-Jones. She used exclusion plots, a little experiment with replicate exclusion plots, and this area included both horses and deer. So the damage we've measured here includes both horses and deer. So the feral herbivores together reduced soil stability, water infiltration, nutrient cycling, soil biological cover, invertebrates, plant cover, under and mid-story height, snow grasses, understory seeds, and they increased sheet and gully erosion, and they increased the amount of sediment going into the Snowy River. So they have big impacts in dry country as well as high country. The thing is about the damage that horses cause, it expands and worsens with only a small number of them present. So this is the study by Tolsma and Shannon on the Bogong High Plains. And in that area, it's about 320 square kilometres, there were estimated about 109 horses in 2018. Now, among the data they presented in their study, they included 56 sites that were surveyed in 2 time periods, and they only recorded damage attributable to horses. So this is not being confused with damage by other animals. In 2006 to 8, they found that less than 4% of the bogs had feral horse impacts. In 2017, 32% of those bogs had been impacted, and that's with only 109 horses present. So they concluded that there is unlikely to be an acceptable minimum population size that would avoid incremental ongoing degradation. Essentially, you really cannot have large numbers of horses in these national parks. It takes too long for them to recover, and they're extremely vulnerable.